Let's take a look at the origins of the Cold War. It begins at the end of World War II and is born out of the ideological differences between America and the Soviet Union. So let's take a look at those ideological differences. America believes in a system known as capitalism. And this is the belief that everyone should be free to own property and business and make money. The USA and most of the West's economic ideology was capitalist. This is about money generation and creating wealth, therefore keeping the economy growing efficiently and creating competition between big business. In summary, they think this believes it will generate wealth, competition, and growth, and it's all about wealth creation. The Soviet Union, however, believe in a system called communism. This is the belief that all property, including homes and businesses, should belong to the state, as in the government, and ensure that everyone gets an equal share. So effectively, it should be kind of a classless society where everybody earns roughly the same. It is based on the writings of Karl Marx and was used within the Soviet Union. It does not create competition or growth within society because everybody sort of earns similar. All business is owned by the government, so there's no competition and things like that. In summary, there's equality in wealth, but this ultimately will lead to stagnation and no businesses grow. So effectively, the Cold War is basically these two belief systems trying to prove that they are superior to the other in a variety of different ways. Basically, we're looking at a load of years of one-upmanship and trying to prove you better than the other. So, how does it begin then? Well, it begins at the end of World War II. And who are our main characters at this point? Well, you've got the Grand Alliance, which is made up of the USA, a democratic capitalist country who weren't particularly aggressive towards other leaders, and they were led at the start of the Cold War by a president called Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR. In other ones in the Grand Alliance, you've got Britain, led by Winston Churchill, who followed traditionalist values and is very, very suspicious of communism and Stalin in particular. He recognises Stalin as being a tricky customer. It's a democratic capitalist country. However, it is very imperialistic with a large empire. Now, that's going to lead Churchill into disagreements with Roosevelt because Roosevelt doesn't like the fact that Britain wants to keep hold of its empire. The third player in the Grand Alliance is the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, a one-party communist dictator looking for the right to spread communism into Eastern Europe and make these other countries satellite states and establish them as a buffer zone for protection for the Soviet Union. Now, here's the thing. These three countries and these three leaders disagree with each other about things. Whilst USA and Britain are both capitalist, they disagree about the right to have empire, and the Soviet Union disagrees with both of them because it's communist. So what brings them all together? What makes them team up? Well, it's very simple. They are all united in their hatred towards Nazism and Hitler. So they joined together in order to defeat Hitler. How did they do it? Well, through a series of conferences. The first conference takes place in November 1943 in Tehran. What you'll notice is that's November 1943, so that is still during World War II. And the aim of this conference really is to produce a plan to win the war. In the build-up to the conference, there is friction or tension before the conference, as Stalin thinks that the USA and Britain are deliberately delaying an invasion of Europe to weaken the Soviet Union as they were fighting Germany alone. So what's important to understand here is that at this point, the USA and Britain we've not had D-Day yet. They are not involved in the war in Europe as much as Russia. The Soviet Union is effectively fighting its land army against Germany's land army in the east. And Stalin thinks that the USA and Britain are deliberately delaying their invasion of Europe because the longer Stalin has to fight Germany on his own, the weaker the Soviet Union will become. And in effect, this would allow Britain and America to just sweep in and claim all the glory. So he's very, very suspicious of Britain and France. The agreements made at this conference are that the USA and Britain agree to open a second front to ease pressure on Russia. That would later become D-Day. So USA and Britain agree we will attack Germany from the west, as in coming through France. The agreement is also in exchange for this that Stalin would then declare war on Japan only after the war in Europe ends. So at this time, the USA is at war with Japan. That's where they're fighting in the Pacific. So Stalin says, as long as you help me in Europe, once that is finished, Stalin agrees to help America defeat Japan in the Pacific. The Soviet Union, in exchange for this, the Soviet Union will be allowed to keep the land it had seized, and that Poland should receive land from Germany. There is some tension between the USA and Britain, as FDR was pragmatic in dealing with Stalin. That means effectively FDR is realistic. He realizes that with Stalin, we're going to have to give a little and we're going to have to get a little. We're going to have to compromise with him in order to get anything achieved. Whereas Churchill kind of hoped they would be stronger against Stalin and they could steamroll in together. In summary, the big three was kind of becoming the big two as America and the Soviet Union started to divide the world up between themselves. This meant that relations between the Soviet Union and the US improved slightly. As Stalin was pleased with the agreements made, he starts thinking, well, I was suspicious going into it, but actually we've come out of that all right. So there's a slight improvement in the relations. The next conference takes place in Yalta in February of 1945. Now, this is still during World War II. However, it's nearing the end of the war and victory is in sight. So this is more about sort of deciding, okay, we're inevitably eventually going to defeat Hitler, and they're deciding what will we do with the world once we do. They agree on the following things. Germany would be split into 4 zones, and Britain, France, America, and the Soviet Union would have influence in those 4 zones. Germany would have to pay 20 billion in reparations, and they also decide that they will form the United Nations. Stalin agrees to join the war in Japan, and Stalin also agreed that future governments of countries in Eastern Europe would be decided in free elections, as in like untampered with, not fixed, not rigged elections. He says the countries in Eastern Europe can decide who they want to govern them. Poland remains a problem, as its borders would be returned to their positions that they were at in 1921, and there would be free elections. Stalin believes this will produce a pro-communist government. However, Britain supported the non-communist London Poles, and the London Poles are the government which controlled Poland before Hitler's invasion, which started World War II. So that's basically the exiled Polish government. And Britain thinks, well, once the war's over, let's just bring back their previous government, or they will be voted in. Whereas Stalin thinks, well, once we have a vote in Poland, we will have a new communist party leading the country, thinking, we can use them as a satellite state. Poland will continue to remain an issue in future meetings between the countries. The next conference, taking place in August of 1945, is Potsdam. The problem with this meeting is there's new faces. The end of World War II means they have no common purpose. Germany surrendered in May. So basically, they've got no common enemy. Hitler, the one thing that was uniting them in hatred or forcing them to work together, is gone. We've also got new faces. President Roosevelt has been replaced by Truman, who in August of 1945 has dropped the first atomic bomb. Truman had delayed the Potsdam meeting until the atom bomb was ready because he wanted to use it to show strength and intimidate Stalin. But this is a huge miscalculation because instead it infuriates Stalin. What Stalin thinks now is, well, I wanted a buffer zone before, you've now got a nuclear bomb, so I'm more determined than ever to get those satellite states in Eastern Europe under my control as a buffer zone. This will eventually or ultimately lead to an arms race between the countries. So Truman, in summary, replaces Roosevelt, delays the meeting until he's got the atomic bomb at his disposal, and then tests it 2 days into the meeting as a clear show of strength and force designed to intimidate Stalin, but it kind of infuriates him and makes him more determined to get the buffer zone. Truman wants to get tough with Stalin, and Truman delayed the meeting as we've discussed. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, had been replaced by Clement Attlee. Attlee, however, is more concerned with domestic matters and saw the conference as a distraction. He just wants to get it over and done with, basically. Germany was, as discussed earlier, split into 4 zones, and so was the capital city of Berlin. So within the Soviet Union's eastern zone, you have Berlin as its own city that will then be divided into 4 itself. The Soviets wanted a larger share of the reparations because they say, well, you know, we've been given the poorest areas of Germany in the split. The east of Germany is less economically successful than the west. And not only that, we've lost millions of lives fighting against Hitler. He says, we have made the biggest sacrifice, so we should get the biggest share of the reparations. No agreement is made over Eastern Europe. Truman didn't like Soviet control, but couldn't act on it as it could lead to more war.